Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And thanks for being here on this chilly day. Um, well, for several weeks now, we've been referring to the Vimalakirti Sutra, and we've gotten up to the chapter where the goddess appears. But this is a rich chapter, and the goddess appears towards the end of the chapter. So we won't get to the goddess today. That'll be next week. But there's a conversation in the first part of this chapter between Vimalakirti, who's lying in his sickbed, and Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And as you recall, we've talked about before how the Bodhisattva is kind of an archetype for how to live in the Mahayana tradition. But there are many different varieties of Bodhisattva to accommodate all the different traits and talents that different individuals possess. As you recall, we read sort of a listing of all these different bodhisattvas. The bodhisattva viewing equality and inequality, the bodhisattva viewing inequality, the bodhisattva viewing equality, the bodhisattva meditation freedom king, the bodhisattva dharma freedom king, the bodhisattva dharma forms, bodhisattva shining forms, bodhisattva shining adornment, bodhisattva great adornment, bodhisattva jeweled accumulation, etc. All these different ways of living in the world, all of them by the bodhisattva archetype. And the chapter that we're going to talk about today is entitled Regarding Living Beings. And Manjushri is putting questions to Vimalakirti. Now, it's an interesting dynamic because they're both bodhisattvas. And Vimalakirti could be asking Manjushri the same questions. They're trying to exchange perspectives. It's kind of like two surgeons talking about operative technique, or two roofers talking about tools and equipment. So they're discussing. And Vimalakirti is, in this case, in the role of questioner. And I'm sorry, Manjushri is in the role of questioner, and he asks Vimalakirti, how does the Bodhisattva regard living beings? Well, this is a fairly fundamental question. How do you perceive others? How do you perceive yourself? Because this does not exclude self. So all living beings, animals, other people, oneself. How does the Bodhisattva regard living beings? He's asking us kind of a prescription. How should we regard others and ourselves? And Vimalakirti replies, as a conjurer looks on the beings he has conjured up, thus does the Bodhisattva regard living beings. As the wise view the moon in the water, or a face or form seen in a mirror, as shimmers of heat in a torrid season, as the echo that follows a cry, as clouds in the sky, as foam on the water, bubbles on the water, as things no firmer than the trunk of the plantain, no longer lasting than a flash of lightning, as a fifth great element, a sixth component, a seventh sense media, a 13th sense media, a 19th sense realm. Thus does the Bodhisattva regard living beings. And he goes on with similar kinds of metaphors. But Manjushri then follows with a question that I think is very central. He says, okay, if you're regarding living beings as phantoms and ghosts and reflections in a mirror, if they're that ethereal, if the Bodhisattva looks on beings in this way, how can he treat them with compassion? Vimalakirti replies, when the Bodhisattva has finished regarding them in this way, he thinks to himself or herself, for the sake of living beings, I must preach the Dharma to them. This is true compassion. He treats them with the compassion of tranquil extinction, for it results in no birth. Treats them with the compassion unburning, for it is void of earthly desires. Treats them with a compassion that is impartial, as the three existences of past, present, and future are impartial. Treats them with compassion free of contention, for nothing arises to oppose it. Treats them with a compassion undualistic, for internal and external have no place in it. Treats them with a compassion unfaltering, for it carries through to the end. Treats them with a compassion firm and durable, for the mind of the Bodhisattva never flags. Treats them with a compassion clean and pure, as the nature of all phenomena is pure. Treats them with a compassion boundless, boundless as the empty sky. He goes on with other similar metaphors. Well, this is Burton Watson's translation of the Vimalakirti Sutra, and also available, and actually available online. There is a website called 84,000. If you just put in the Google search 84,000 and Buddhism, it'll pop up. And on that website, there are a number of translations of sutras, including this one, but the translation used there is from Robert Thurman. And it's pretty similar to the one that he published in 1976. And surprisingly to me, Thurman didn't mention the word compassion in that last passage. He used the term great love. And in a footnote, he indicated that the Sanskrit from which both of these terms are translated is Maha Maitri. Maha, great, Maitri. Now, Maitri is the Sanskrit word that corresponds to metta in Pali. And some of you may be more familiar with the term metta. And metta is hardly ever translated as compassion. It's usually translated nowadays as loving kindness, or simply love, or simply kindness. But Maitri, suggests sort of an all-encompassing love, an unconditional love, a great love, a non-possessive love. So Robert Thurman's translation of that same passage, it has a different sound to it. So Manjushri asks again, if a bodhisattva considers all living beings in such a way, how does he generate great love towards them? Vimalakirti replies, Manjushri, when a bodhisattva considers all living beings in this way, he thinks, just as I have realized the Dharma, so I should share it with other living beings. Therefore, he generates the love that is truly a refuge for all living beings, the love that is peaceful because free of grasping, the love that is not feverish because free of passions, the love that accords with reality because it is equanimitous in all three times, the love that is without conflict because free of the violence of the passions, the love that is non-dual because it is involved neither with the external nor the internal, the love that is imperturbable because totally ultimate. To me, it has just a little warmer and more personal feel about it. Then the Watson translation using compassion. Compassion actually has, there is a Sanskrit word karuna that is usually translated as compassion. So I'm not sure why Watson chose that translation, although at the time that Burton Watson translated this text, he was relying on the Chinese translation from the Sanskrit because the Sanskrit was not available. The Sanskrit only came into, well, we only found a copy of it within the last couple decades. So it's a fairly recent finding of the entire Sanskrit text. But in any case, I think we get a flavor of what Vimalakirti is talking about. Now, there was a, so this is about how we regard ourselves and others. And I was drawn to this photograph that I saw recently. And also I noticed it wasn't copyrighted, so I could use it freely. I don't know exactly where this occurred. There have been many places it could have occurred. But you can see a crowd of people, a crowd of living beings regarding one another. And it's interesting to notice some of the detail. There's of course, the central focus is this young man here in the Trump t-shirt that looks like it's been splattered with some sort of liquid. I don't know what happened there. And then sort of the secondary focus is this gentleman here, who appears to be Black and is wearing an Afghanistan veteran hat. And then there are all these onlookers. This woman here, the sort of the third focus in the photograph is this woman who's getting ready to take a picture with a fairly fancy camera, and she's got this camo New York Yankees hat. I didn't know that such things existed, but she's wearing that. And then over here to the side, there's this man who's sort of looking calmly on in a Boston White Sox hat. And then there are all the other individuals, many of whom have their phones out or cameras, and they're trying to position themselves to capture this scene. And one thing you notice about this grouping of individuals is, one thing I notice is, if you ask yourself, is there any joy in this picture? I don't see any joy. There's certainly evidence of anger and evidence of sort of giddy excitement by perhaps some of the photographers. And maybe evidence of sort of bland interest, but I don't see any joy. So the question is, how are these people regarding one another? Are they regarding one another as ghosts and phantoms, and as brief as a flash of lightning, it's transient? On the contrary, I think at least some of the individuals are regarding one another as representatives of some sort of construct, of some sort of ideology, or as sort of a fixed representative of something that perhaps they don't like. There's a play that some of you may be familiar with called No Exit by Paul Sartre. And in that play, there are three individuals locked in a room. They've all died, and they're in hell because of their misdeeds during their lifetime. And much to their surprise, they find out that hell involves being locked in the same room with two other people for eternity. And from that play, the most famous quote is, "Hell is other people." but it's not exactly that. It's the hells we create seem to arise when we impose our constructions, our constructs on others, essentially applying a fixative to them. And create a batch of expectations surrounding those constructs. And we do this to others, of course, and others do it to us. And by and large, it doesn't feel good. So I think Vimalakirti is encouraging us to refrain from that. And thus to view living beings as the mysterious phenomena in process that they are. And to refrain from applying a fixative. At the risk of losing my job as the Saturday speaker, I'm going to read a passage from a favorite movie of mine. It's a movie script. Because I think it speaks to the same issue. Some of you may be familiar with the film. It's an odd film. It's called My Dinner with Andre. And if you aren't familiar with it, it's an hour-and-a-half long conversation over dinner between Wally, who is a playwright in New York, and Andre, who is a theater director. And Andre does most of the talking. Andre sort of serves the Vimalakirti role in the movie. And Wally serves the Manjushri role, the questioner. And towards the end of this long, meandering conversation, Wally says, yeah, I think it's that moment of contact with another person. I mean, that's what scares us. I mean, that moment of being face to face with another person. I mean, now you wouldn't think it would be frightening. It's strange that we find it so frightening. Andre replies, well, I guess it isn't that strange. I mean, first of all, there are some pretty good reasons for being frightened. I mean, you know, the human being is a complex and dangerous creature. I mean, really, if you start living each moment, Christ, that's quite a challenge. I mean, if you really reach out and you're really in touch with the other person, well, that really is something to strive for. I think I really do. Wally says, yeah, it's just so pathetic that one doesn't do that. And then Andre goes on, of course, there's a problem. Because the closer you come, I think, to another human being, the more completely mysterious and unreachable that person becomes. I mean, you know, you have to reach out, you have to go back and forth with them, and you have to relate. And yet you're relating to a ghost or something. I don't know, because we're ghosts. We're phantoms. Who are we? And that's to face to confront the fact that you're completely alone. And to accept that you're alone is to accept death. You see, that's why I think people have affairs. I mean, you know, in the theater, if you get good reviews and at first, for a moment, you think you've got your hands on something. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a good feeling. But then that feeling goes away quite quickly. And once again, you don't know quite what you should do next. What'll happen? Well, have an affair. And up to a certain point, you can really feel like you're on firm ground. You know, there's the sexual conquest to be made. There are different questions. Does she enjoy the ears being nibbled? How intensely can you talk about Schopenhauer at some elegant French restaurant? Whatever the nonsense is, it's all, I think, to give you the semblance that there's firm earth. Well, have a good relationship with a person that goes on for years. That's completely unpredictable. Then you're cut off, all your ties to the land, and you're sailing into the unknown, into uncharted seas. I mean, you know, people hold on to these images of father, mother, husband, wife, again, for the same reason, because they seem to provide some firm ground. But there's no wife there. What does that mean? A wife, a husband, a son, a baby holds your hands, and then suddenly this huge man is lifting you off the ground, and then he's gone. Where's that son? So this section of the chapter was about how we regard living beings and the effect this might have on our ability to treat them with compassion or great love. So I think I'll stop there and just maybe encourage thought about how do we regard other living beings, including animals, and where do we go off the rails? Where do we go awry? And I think we can break up then into smaller groups, maybe, I don't know, a couple, and then come back in a few minutes and discuss more together. Thank you so much for listening.